Greetings and welcome to the University of Minnesota Alumni Association's webinar series. My name is John Ruzek and I'm the Senior Director of Alumni Networks here at the U. Thank you to all alumni and friends who have made time to join us live today. Over 500 of you registered today because you out there are interested in salary negotiation. So if you're merely accepting a job offer without negotiating your pay, you may be leaving money on the table. In fact, many employers expect candidates to negotiate and are surprised when people don't even ask. So our speaker today will be covering why you should negotiate, how-to and guidelines for successful salary negotiations, common mistakes and a few horror stories, what the employer is thinking, common myths, and why they are false. This webinar is open to everyone, but is aimed at job seekers who are less experienced with salary negotiations or just are uncomfortable with these negotiations in general. Today's webinar is part of a free series being offered by the University of Minnesota Alumni Association, where we're having conversations with experts about career, life, and learning topics. We generally run monthly webinars, and we'll be doing so through May, and then we'll be launching a new series in July. Initiatives like this are made possible by our members, and we thank you all very much for that. The webinar is being recorded and will be viewable afterwards at minnesotalumni.org/webinars. Just give us a few days to post it on our website. And if you're on Twitter right now, tweet at us with the hashtag UMNWebinar. Again, that's UMNWebinar. And we'd love to hear from you, or if you have a question that way, I'll be looking at Twitter too. And if you're on LinkedIn, also connect in with our 31,000 person strong LinkedIn group. As I mentioned, we have a couple webinars between now and May. The April one later on, 2 weeks from now, on effective communication styles, and the May 19th one on student debt management. Again, minnesotalumni.org/webinars. Before we get started, let's go over a few items so you can effectively participate in today's webinar. You have joined the presentation listening using your computer speaker system by default. If you'd prefer to listen over the telephone, just select telephone in the audio pane of your GoToWebinar panel and dial-in information will be displayed. If you experience audio difficulties while listening via your computer, this can be caused by having multiple software applications open, which can use up your computer's bandwidth and affect network performance. Also, if you're listening over wireless, that might not be as reliable as a hardline internet connection. But again, feel free to close any unnecessary applications on your computer. Questions are welcome, and you may submit them at any time. Please type in your questions in the questions pane on your GoToWebinar control panel, and I'll be monitoring them along the way. So send any questions that you have about salary negotiation there. It is my pleasure now to introduce today's webinar speaker, Steve Helen. Steve has been negotiating business agreements daily for nearly 2 decades. He is a partner at Fredrickson and Byron Law Firm, where he's the chair of the Technology, Internet, and E-Business Group and co-chair of the Media and Entertainment Group. He is a cum laude graduate of both Vassar College and the University of Michigan Law School, and he was also very, very kind to do this presentation last year in person to an audience here at the University of Minnesota. So I'm absolutely delighted to bring him into our webinar series today so he can share even his insights with even more people in our community. Welcome, Steve.
John, thank you very much. So I'm delighted to be here. I love this topic, and it's one where I'm happy to spend some time with folks and do it again. Now I'm just getting coached by John's colleague Aaron here in the room with me, so I can click and try to competently execute the slides.
There you go.
All right, I get at least a satisfactory on that. So, kicking this off, so I'm a corporate business lawyer by day, and I don't usually represent individuals. But what happened is I was having with my clients and business owners and some friends who are now in a position to hire, and I've been hiring people from time to time, and the same things came up again and again, and the conversation started with, I was hiring someone and they didn't negotiate, and it was so surprising to the business owners. And so what began as this sort of recurring theme in conversations, I thought, let me make this more of a project. And then I set out to have be a little bit more systematic in the questions I was asking and the data I was gathering. With that said, I'm not an academic, and I think that what I have here are some insights from a business person who does this a lot. I don't think that what I've done rises to the level of scholarly research. Next, I'll say, although I do consider myself a cheerleader for negotiating, and I want to encourage you to negotiate, and I'll tell you why and some tips, I haven't always loved it, right? So I'm not that person who was born to negotiate. For work, and I do it all the time, it's fine negotiating on behalf of clients in my job. That was never that difficult. But negotiating on behalf of myself was tougher. And candidly, I still have to kind of psych myself up to do it. So if that's the boat that you find yourself in, is knowing that you should but you don't want to, then you and I are in the same boat. The first time I negotiated a salary was when I had just graduated from college, and like I said, my kind of core audience here are folks who are about to graduate from college to early to mid-career folks, looking at professional or post-college jobs. So at my first post-college job, I was living in Washington, D.C. It was 1991, and I accepted a job without negotiating as a research assistant at a small think tank, and I was making $18,000 a year. That was not a ton, but I was happy to have a job. The economy wasn't great, and I certainly felt like if I didn't say yes when I got the offer, there would be somebody else who was excited to have the job and live in Washington, D.C. and all that. I discovered about 9 months into my job, when I became friends with some other people, that a person who had the same job as me with a researcher had negotiated, and he had negotiated $21,000, which if you're making 18, that $3,000 difference is a big difference. I was kind of ticked, but I was also kind of motivated. So then when my annual contract came up, I got some reasons, I got some data, and I was able to negotiate a raise and bump up to $21,000. I'll say at the same time, one of my other coworkers, she, who had a similar job title, she didn't ask, and she got, I think, like a $500 or maybe a $1,000 raise. And when she found out about what other people had, she was really unhappy about it. So one of the reasons why you should negotiate, I'll just say, is that you owe it to yourself, that if you don't ask, your colleagues are asking, and you may end up regretting it. I'll also just do a thank you here to a variety of folks. Thanks to John, who did the introductions, and to his colleague Aaron, who's helping me try to operate the computer. Also, thanks to Morgan Kinross Wright over at the Carlson School, who began getting this all connected, and to Lars Lichblad, who used to be associated with the U here, but now is in an executive search firm called Ballinger Lichblad. All right, I advanced my first slide. I'll also say thank you to my confidential sources. For the past 3 years, when I began to get more serious about this, I started taking notes on interviews. And I've interviewed over 80 people. They are business owners and senior executives and human resources professionals across a range of industries. Tech, health, government, professional services, really a wide range. Focusing again on the kind of post-college job from new post-college to kind of 10, 15 years out. And that's kind of my data set. Let's jump into our first Mythbuster. A lot of people begin by saying, well, some people love negotiating or it's easy for them, but I'm not cut out to be a negotiator. Or I'm not a strong negotiator naturally. Let me just say that's false. And studies and research bears that out. Successful negotiation is an independent trait. And what I mean by that is it doesn't correlate to your grades, to your IQ, to your income, to gender or race. That when we've looked at who, for example, wins law school negotiation competitions, it's the person with the worst grades in the class can be the winner of that competition. It correlates along nothing else. So don't let that be your excuse to not negotiate. In addition, I'll say that just a few tips will improve your outcomes. And then finally, I think this is a really important point. Negotiation pays off or has benefits even if you're not very good at it. I think there's this fallacy that says, oh, I've got to be a great negotiator. My counterpart is a great negotiator, the human resources professional or the business owner. And if I'm not really good, I won't get the benefits. That is not true for some reasons that I'm going to explain a little bit further on. All right, so here's my slide for this. This is why we're afraid to negotiate, right? Either we don't want to be this person, the used car salesman, or we think we're negotiating against that person and we don't have a chance. And part of I feel like our society sort of plays into that, right? Most of us don't negotiate on a daily basis. So we only do very rarely, and then it's for high stakes things like a car or a job or a house. and the person on the other side of the table does it all the time, and so you feel like the tables are weighed against you. There are also some general books on negotiating that can be useful. One of them, the most well-known one is Getting to Yes, which has sold millions and millions of copies. My comment or my tip for you here is the employment relationship is a really unique relationship. And while those general books on negotiation and some general guides on negotiation can have some applicability, the things we're going to talk about that are unique in the employment context, I think candidly makes it easier for you to negotiate or easier for you to be successful in your negotiations. Here's just one or two examples, right? The employment relation, if you buy a used car from this guy in my slide, after you pay that person the money and drive off the lot, like that's the end of the relationship, right? You might never see that person again. Whereas in the employment relationship, it's the beginning. And so the employer wants you to be happy. They want you to be satisfied. They want you to show up and be excited to begin the new job. And so although the car salesman might try to rip you off and charge the most they could for a crummy car, that's not true of the employment relationship. Again, if somebody gives you a low ball offer, that's way below market, you've already got a resume that's ready to go, right? And you're out there networking and interviewing and whatever else you're doing. And so it doesn't really pay for an employer to pay way below market because they're going to hire some person, train them, get them on the payroll, integrate them into the system only to have them quit shortly thereafter because they found a better paying job. So that's just one example. Agenda. John touched on this earlier, why you should negotiate, some guidelines. Inside the employer's mind, I think that this is one of the things that's more unique about what I'm bringing to the table, is the employer's point of view. And I think that because they're my clients and I'm usually on the business side, I think that people tell me things that maybe they wouldn't tell to a career counselor. And then finally, myth busting and practical tips. Let me also say, in case, I don't know, maybe people are taking notes, maybe you aren't, there's lots of great written materials out there, including really good written materials that the University of Minnesota provides. I just Googled before I came over here today, what is it, University of Minnesota, and was it College of Liberal Arts, and then negotiation tips. And there's a really nice piece on your own website. Also, I'll give a shout out to John Ruzick here at the Alumni Association. If you follow him on Twitter or on LinkedIn, John is posting things from time to time that relate to these same topics, and I read them. They're well done. So there are two thoughts for you. So no need to take notes unless you really feel like it, and the notes shouldn't be too extensive. And if you're getting past one page, then maybe you're writing down too much. All right, next Mythbuster. So here in the slide, right, we have the employer on the left, the applicant, job applicant over on the right, that's you. And the first myth I wanted to dispel, and this when I began my research, was the concern or the fear, if I negotiate, the employer will take back or rescind the offer, right? So I just got my job offer, they offered me, here I'm making up a number, right? They offered me $40,000. I'd better say yes, because if I ask for more, the employer will say, are you crazy? There's 20 other people, there's 100 other people who applied for this job. Get out of my office, the job is gone, and it goes away. Because I wanted to encourage people to negotiate, and I felt like in my own experience that negotiation was at least permitted and not inappropriate, I didn't want to give the advice to go out and negotiate if that was terrible advice, that if employers would take away the job offers. So that was kind of my initial question I began asking my clients, my human resources departments, and so forth. So ballpark here, right, I talked to about 50 people early on in my first 2 years of research, and they each talked about 100 cases, ballpark, that negotiated. So the 5,000 candidates who asked for a salary raise or asked to negotiate, one offer was revoked, okay? 1 out of 5,000 candidates. The other 4,999 either were neutral or better. And let me tell you what I mean by this. So in the one case, the job offer, hypothetically $40,000, the person said, hey, is that negotiable? And the employer said, no, it's not. And by the way, for asking, get out of my office. I'm taking the job away. The other 4,999 cases, either the employer said, maybe it is negotiable and maybe you would get a raise, so that's like a positive outcome, or it was neutral in the sense that the employer might say, no, the job offer is $40,000. I can't offer you more than that, but the $40,000 offer is still there and remains there on the table, okay? So the odds are really stacked in your favor here in the sense that the worst case scenario is you're going to do neutral. They'll say, no, you can't negotiate. Let me now go back to the one offer that was revoked so that I'm not scaring people. It actually wasn't a case where the person simply asked, hey, is this negotiable? In that particular case, with the one where the offer was revoked, the job offer was at $30,000. The person said, hey, you know, that's $30,000 is fine, but really I'm fantastic. I'm going to be a great employee. I want $60,000. Okay, so they countered at more than double, and they were kind of rude. They were kind of jerky about the whole thing. And so I think that those two factors together led the employer to believe when I was talking to her, she said, you know what, if this person wanted to double the salary, they hadn't done any research, they didn't know what the job was really about. There was kind of a disconnect. So long as your salary is in the ballpark and you're not jerky about it, I think you're going to get a neutral or better outcome. Here's my pledge, because I'm always collecting data. First is, if you're an employee and you do this, you try to negotiate and you say, hey, is this negotiable? And the employer takes away the job offer. Please let me know about it. And I'm not promising I can do anything about it. I probably can't. But you know what? I've got a lot of clients at a lot of places, and I'd like to hear your story at least, because that doesn't seem right by merely asking. Now, again, I want to be clear. I'm not saying that you'll come to terms, meaning if they offer 40 and you want 50,000, I'm not saying you'll agree, right? They might just say, no, it's 40,000, that's it. But that the initial offer of 40 won't be taken off the table merely because you ask or negotiate. Similarly, if you're an employer, if you're from a human resources department and you do hiring, if you're a business owner and you're listening and you think differently, and if you think that you are taking offers off the table, please, there's my email address that's at work. I'll try to respond promptly. Let me know. Because like I said, I'm always collecting more data. But so far in my 3 years of research, I have not found that any more than one job offer is revoked. Why negotiate? The offer is not the finish line. So in my own life, in my own negotiations, I know that once you get the job offer, while you're applying, your whole life is kind of up in the air, right? You don't know what your job is going to be. You don't know if you'll have to move. You're pursuing a number of different options. It really kind of consumes your whole life. And so when you get the offer, it's like a, whew, right? You breathe out and exhale some fresh air. And it's really tempting, I know, just to lock it down, right? It's very tempting at that moment in time to say, okay, I've got the offer. I'm going to say yes, so I can start planning my future and get rid of my other, kind of get rid of the resume file and all that, and it'll just be a huge relief. Part of why I'm a cheerleader and I want to be here is I want to encourage you to, keep running just another like 10 yards, right? Another 20 yards. It's not that far. You're almost there, but just extend it a little bit, because by extending your effort a little bit, the rewards are substantial. Here's part of why, and this is, again, if you're newer to kind of your post-college career, this might be new information. For those of you who've been out in the workforce for a while, it probably isn't. Once you actually start your job and your initial compensation is set, annual raises are pretty modest, okay? 3% is an average annual raise throughout a person having the same job. So it's something, right, but it's not a gigantic step. So where you start, right, your initial salary is really a great time to try to get a 3%, 6%, 9% step up, because that's equal to, like I say, 1 or 2 or 3 years equal to a salary bump. I should also stop here and say one of the side comments that some of my sources commented on was, so yes, over time people will get raises, but the other way that people actually increase their compensation over the course of their whole career is by applying for new jobs, and that the best time to apply for a new job is when you're being successful in your current job. I know, again, it's human nature, right? You're doing well at your current job. You just kind of want to go along with that. Most people don't start applying for a new job or preparing their resume until their current job makes them unhappy, or whatever the case is. Let me challenge or encourage you, after you've been in your current job for a year or 2 or 3, maybe build up some skills, consider brushing up your resume and applying for some new jobs, maybe within your same organization, maybe within the next organization, because staying in the same job for your whole career with the same job title is not how people get significant increases in their salary over their lifetime. It's by moving to a new job or a new employer with a new title. Why negotiate? So this is not my data, and I've got to say, like, I'm not in love with this slide, but I just kind of, it's illustrative of something. I'm not quite sure what. And this purports to show the difference between one person who negotiates, right, a couple thousand, $5,000 difference, the difference between 45 and 50,000. And then they get certain raises over their career. And then the comment at the bottom is, over the course of Jim's career, he's the one that didn't negotiate. He'll miss out on $1 million in wages. So, okay, I guess that's one reason to negotiate. And I think the general principle, which is you'll make more money, substantially more money over the course of your career, I agree with that. The thing that I don't love about this is it shows kind of these smooth lines as though that's how your salary increases. And I think that's just not how it works. I think the way people's salaries work in real life is they're kind of like a crooked set of steps where the line increases a little bit and then jumps up, and that's the next job, and then increases a little bit over a couple of years and then jumps up. So that's, and the jump up, right, that's when you apply for a new job or a promotion or talk to a new employer. The other thing that I'll add here, and this is kind of a gender-specific comment. One of the women business owner executives that I talked to, she was saying, and this was repeated by others, it wasn't just this one person, but I think of the particular conversation. She's like, you know, when I post a new job within my company, I will have typically guys who maybe they're fully qualified or maybe they're only partway qualified for the job. They'll all apply. They'll throw their hat in the ring. I see a lot of resumes. Good for them, right? Good for throwing their hat in the ring. But in terms of the women who apply, they typically only apply if they can kind of like check the box for every single one of the qualifications or criteria. And if they are short even one, they don't apply for the job. So they're less likely to throw their hat in the ring for what I'll call like a stretch position. So this person, I'm going to kind of repeat this particular person's request or encouragement, which is everybody, you know, men or women, but especially the women who are listening, who might be less likely to. When you're looking at what jobs you might apply for, look at what you think is a fit, and then maybe look like one step up, okay? And see if that might be a stretch application you might want to consider. Again, I don't know what the downside is. Maybe there's some time investment, but especially within organizations that like to hire and promote from within, if they see talent and initiative, that will count for a lot, and very, very few employers that I know have like an absolute requirement. You got to check the box in every single qualification. And a person who's really strong in one might make up for the lack of a qualification in another. All right, why negotiate? Well, more money now, right? That's kind of obvious. There's a saying and in business that I think has a lot of truth, right? Don't ask, don't get. So if you are not asking for a raise or to negotiate your salary, the employer is probably not going to give it to you. We talked about the annual raise being 3%. Another important reason, your current salary is going to set the basis for your next job. And then, as I said before, what sort of started me down the road of negotiation, which is your colleagues are doing it, right? You might as well be negotiating because a lot of people around you are doing that as well. Some more reasons to negotiate. Even if you get a no, right, even the person comes back and says, sorry, it's a fixed salary at $40,000, I can't move off of that number, that is what it is. And that's true, actually. I'll say that where I work now at my law firm, for our first-year attorneys, because I tried to negotiate when I started working where I am, and they said, no, we're happy to have you here at the law firm, but it's a fixed starting salary for all of our first-year attorneys. There's no negotiation. So even if you get a no, let me just say, don't be discouraged by that for a number of reasons. One is the very fact that you negotiated and asked sends a positive signal to your employer, right, that you're ambitious, that you want to go somewhere. And again, if you're newer to the workforce or newer to having a professional job or newer to a particular workplace, you know, management is paying attention to who seems ambitious and who wants to do things. So although you might not get a yes right away, you know what, when a new office or a new promotion comes up, the fact that you negotiated is going to stick in some people's minds and give you more opportunities down the road. Next point, many employers expect you to ask. I had a number of my 80 sources say, you know, Steve, sometimes I'll call up a job applicant and I'll call them and I'll tell them that they've got the offer and say, congratulations, you've got the offer. and like before I even kind of finish my sentence, they'll jump in and say, I accept, I can't wait to start. And on the one hand, those employers are kind of flattered a little bit that you're really excited to start. But honestly, more than being flattered, they're a little surprised because this is an important decision, right? And they're a little bit weirded out by the idea that you wouldn't want to do things like get the whole package in writing, think about it for a while. So let me just say that if some of you are thinking, well, by accepting right away and not negotiating, I'm sending up a signal of loyalty. Maybe that's true for some people and in some cases, but I think that in more cases, it's a little bit of a strange signal. It's like, doesn't this person want to dive into the details before making an important life decision? So employers will expect you to ask, certainly about a detailed compensation package, think it over, and I think a lot of them are really expecting you to ask and negotiate. Next point, no downside, right? This is the 4,999 people out of 5,000 had either a neutral or a better result. No regret. Right? If you ask, you won't be asking yourself later on, gosh, could I have gotten a raise? Could I have done better? You will know the answer to that because you will have tried. And there's some psychic peace in that. Next point, you get experience. As I said before, right, all too often in at least United States culture most of the time, right, when I go to the department store, the grocery store, I'm not negotiating the way that in some other places and cultures, negotiation is an everyday thing. So a lot of us aren't very good at it. The fact that you've negotiated this time, even if the employer says, sorry, I can't go better than 40,000, you'll be more comfortable and more prepared the next time around. Here's my tip or my encouragement to you, and this works better when we're actually in a physical auditorium together, is you turn to the friend that you came with and promise that you will negotiate. For here on the webinar, let me ask you or encourage you to promise to yourself, or maybe to promise to a significant other in your life that the next time you get a job offer, you will at least ask if the salary is negotiable because the payoffs are so big. All right, some more thoughts on the work that I've done here. These are guidelines, not rules. The one rule I'll say is that information is your friend. Your own specific research is useful. Some folks might say, you know what, the techniques, Steve, that you talked about, they don't apply for my employer. Okay, I accept that. What I'm giving you here is what I've found from these employers across sectors in my own experience. Is it going to be 100% true in every case? I'm sure it's not, so I allow for some exceptions. The way that you can find the exceptions is by doing some research on your own behalf about the particular employer. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. Second, descriptive, not prescriptive. What I mean by that is, this isn't the way that it's, I'm not saying that this is right in the sense that we should have a negotiation-based culture or we shouldn't. In some ways, I'll readily acknowledge that the idea that two candidates or two workers who are totally equally qualified and have the same job duties, the idea that one might get paid more than the other because the one negotiated and the other didn't, and that has some ethical concerns to it, and I'm totally open to that, right? So I'm not saying this is how it ought to be in our ideal or most ethical world. I'm saying that from my perspective here in 2016 in kind of the professional mainstream economy, this is how I think it works. I'll offer one side story, which is when I was talking to people, there was one woman, a successful lawyer, and I asked her, who's the best negotiator that you have ever seen or worked with? And she gave the example of her grandmother who lives in Greece, and there she negotiates every day, right? She negotiates every day in the market, and fixed pricing, the way that we have fixed pricing, is not common. So in any case, she was describing her grandmother's technique, which is to walk over to a particular stall or market and look at the product, maybe it's an apple, and would begin her negotiation by saying, she'd insult the merchandise, right? So step one is, this apple, it's not a great apple, right? The two stalls down, they really have better apples, and I'm not that hungry. And she would kind of go on from there, and this worked for her really well. Of course, here in the United States, in the employment sector, I do not recommend that as step one, you insult the job. I'd say that maybe you'd rather work someplace else. My point is just, right, different times and different places call for different techniques. Research will be your key as to what will be most effective for you. All right, when to talk compensation. Here's the old model, right? What would you do if you simply accepted it when the offer came in? We step one, apply for a job, we interview for your job, you get the offer, you accept, and then done. So let's scratch that approach. Here's what I would encourage or request that you do, right? So we start by applying, interview. Once you interview, you know you're a contender, right? Because not everybody's getting an interview or a callback. At that point, I recommend you begin some research into what the salary might look like, what kind of benefits you should expect, and so forth. Then, hooray, the offer comes, and I want to draw out like a line at the offer, right? Once the offer comes in, the whole power dynamic shifts. Because before the offer, you're just one resume among a whole stack, okay? Once the offer comes in, you're the one that they want. I'm going to come back to this in a second. So after the offer comes in, here's what I want, what I encourage you to do. Express appreciation and enthusiasm, ask for details and ask for the offer in writing, and ask for time to think it over. So offers can come in different ways. Sometimes it's a phone call and it might surprise you. Sometimes it's in writing. Let me take some pressure off you in terms of thinking, oh my God, I've got to be prepared to negotiate right away. No, that is totally false. When you get the offer, especially like I say, if it's by phone or in person, you do not need to negotiate at that point in time. When the offer first comes in, what you do is you say, oh my gosh, this is so great. Thank you so much. I'm really excited. Maybe if you can think of it, you might say, oh, hey, can I get some details? But then the most important parts are you just say, I'd like to get this in writing, which is, again, by the way, always an appropriate question. Any employer who is surprised by that question, I guess that would just be very unusual. And then you ask to think it over. And that's going to buy you some time. And at this point, right, time is, so long as you're not excessive, time is on your side. Then you really begin your research, right? Your further research to see, what do other jobs pay? Are there any other competitive spots? Do I have anybody on the inside? Then you negotiate, right? You either in person or by phone, you contact, and then you see if there's room to move the salary. Then after this, right, maybe the employer responds, discussion, accept, think it over, maybe negotiate further, and then finally you wrap it up, right? Either you accept or you decline. Let me now rewind and go back to the offer. But what I would like to do maybe the next time I do these slides is also do like an employer's timeline, okay, on what's happening from their perspective and how things change at the offer. So while you are applying and you're doing the interviews, they're also, right, sifting through a ton of resumes, okay? So they've got a whole stacks of resumes they're going through, they're reading them, they're doing initial screenings, they're doing other interviews. And so, maybe while you are scheduling your interview, they're already interviewing one or two other people. And by the fact that you're going to get the offer eventually, some of those interviews don't work out, right? They're really excited for a candidate, then the candidate accepts a job someplace else. Once you're the leading contender, okay, again, this is before the offer happens. Once you're the leading contender or one of the finalists, more meetings are happening, right? The employer is talking to a couple of people who you'd work with directly. Then finally there's like an authorization to extend the offer, and then the employer extends the offer. I go into this because a ton of work has happened leading up to you receiving the offer behind the scenes on the employer side. And they've narrowed the field down from, like I say, a bunch of interviews and a ton of resumes down to you. So they want you at that point. You are their pick. And it is also, and once you're their pick, it's not so easy to go back to number 2, right? Or number 3, because they're going to have to repeat a whole bunch of that process. So like I said, you've got leverage after the offer that you don't before the offer. All right, what does research look like in gathering information? Well, first of all, during the interview process, please listen. I think sometimes it's hard to listen and hard to be focused, but the employer will be sending signals to you, when you're at the interview or the callback. Why are you there? What do they like about you? They're probably sending some signals that are differentiators for you that you can use later on potentially for salary negotiation. Next source of research, insider information, right? If you have a friend or a family member who works at that place, especially if it's like, let's say it's like a big corporation or even a small, whatever it is, inside information can be very, very useful. Career Center, right? Again, I know from talking to folks at both the General Undergraduate College and at the Carlson School, and also at the law school, you've got a lot of resources here, right? There's a lot of data, especially for jobs early out. So that can be a source of data. And then finally, online tools. I like Glassdoor.com, but there's others, right? There's Payscale and Salary.com. So do some research. This is a hard topic, and it's one that's kind of a source of frustration for me. It's salary discussions during the application process. Okay, so this is before you get the offer. So for example, during your callback interview, or maybe even on the application, there can be a line item that says, what is your salary expectation? Or what is your aspirational salary? Let me say, generally, you want to avoid answering that question. And here there's a little bit of tension, right? Because whoever you're interviewing with or applying to, they're asking it on a form, or they're asking you in the interview. So they're trying to get that information out of you. Let me just say very, very clearly, this number pre-offer can only hurt you, okay? Because here's what's going to happen, and here's how that number is used. We'll go back to my classic example of a job that's going to pay the initial offer is going to be $40,000. If you say your salary, your desired salary is $45,000 during the application process or during the interview, there's a solid chance this is a screening question, and they're going to throw away your resume and move on to the next person, because again, at this stage, what the employer is trying to do is narrow the field down to a small number of people. So then people will say, well, Steve, what do I do when it's on a form? Okay, if it's on a form for a large employer and like you can't hit submit or complete the page without filling in a number, then you're stuck filling in a number, right? And I'm sorry for that. And to employers out there, let me challenge you here to say, do you really need to ask the question, what is the desired salary? And I guess it serves some purpose, right, in terms of screening out people who have widely different salaries, right? If you're offering 40 and the person wants 60 or 70, I get it. On the other hand, my experience in this area is that employers will start discarding resumes. It's like The Price is Right, where like, it's like closest without going over, but if you go over even by a penny, you're done playing. That's a common approach, right? That going over by even a little bit, not a penny, but even going over by a couple percent will get your resume set aside. I don't love that approach, and so I'd encourage employers not to do that. So if you have to put in a number, go low, and then when it comes time to actually negotiate your salary, I think you can always say things like, well, that was before I had the full information, or I knew the full package, or I knew the benefits. So that's a tough one, but again, let me just encourage you, if they ask you and you can decline, you can say things like, I need to see the whole compensation package, or I want to be paid fairly, and we could talk about that post-offer. So you get the offer. Fantastic. What comes next? Tip number one, enthusiasm and be positive. One of the recurring themes I heard from employers was that there's this like Jekyll and Hyde experience with the applicant, where the person is enthusiastic and asking good questions, and then they get the job offer, and all of a sudden it becomes only about the money. Now, in your own head, it's fine with me if it's primarily about the money at that point, because the money is really important. But at least in terms of what you talk about with the employer, let me encourage you to like make it a total package conversation, both compensation, benefits, vacation, that whole package, but also ask things about job duties. Ask what's the hot new issue that's on their desk that day. You want to sound like you are still enthused about the whole thing and not just about the money. Again, when the offer comes in, as I said before, ask to get it in writing. Do not accept on the spot. I think that employers do not expect you to, and there's a penalty for accepting on the spot. We talked about this now in the timeline earlier, right, of do more research. Another thing that you can do once you get the offer, and this is part of why you ask for it in writing and you ask for some time to consider, is remember the employer now wants you to say yes, and they want to be done so they can check the box and make the hire. If you have other offers out there, that same day, one thing I encourage you to do is pick your one or two other favorite jobs or applications you have outstanding and call those folks and say, hey, you know what? I just want to let you know I received an offer today from one of my other applications, but I really liked you. Is there any chance we could accelerate the process, or would you consider making an offer? To an employer, one of the things that's really attractive is a person who appears to be in demand, right? And the fact that you've got another pending offer makes you in demand. And employers can also accelerate the process. So that can be a really strong thing in your favor. Next, right, you're thinking of the reasons. Why should you get a pay raise or a bump or some other benefit? Practice asking. I know it feels stupid to practice asking, and I feel bad writing that bullet point there. If you can't do it in front of another person because you just refuse to, then do it in front of a mirror. But do at least do it in front of a mirror, or ideally with another person, and say, you know, I was thinking you offered me 40. I really love the job. I'm excited about X, Y, and Z. But due to my experience, due to these, you know, I can start next week, or whatever other your reasons are, I think that $44,000 or $45,000 would be a more appropriate number. Practice those asks. All right, what are persuasive reasons? What are not persuasive reasons? Again, this is things I heard again and again from folks I work, from my sources. The first thing, what's not a persuasive reason? You just want more money, or you have a personal need, like you know, you've got a car repair, or your rent just went up, or you're trying to save up for a house. Now again, those are 100% valid reasons to want a raise and for you to negotiate like in your own head, but those are not going to be persuasive reasons to the employer. Next, predictions that you're going to be super awesome at the job, right? Some employers say that they hear, you know, I'm just going to like really rock this job from the applicant. That might be what the employers think when they hear that is, you know what, show me, and then we can talk about giving you a raise in a year from now. But on pure speculation that you're going to be awesome, that's not going to get you a pay bump in most cases right out of the door as your initial pay increase. Now here's what are valid or persuasive reasons. Number one, what makes you unique, okay? What differentiates you from the other candidates in the same job pile and with a similar job? Maybe that's your experience, right? Maybe it's your education. Maybe you have some other thing like you're multilingual. Maybe you've got some connections or contacts that will move you along further. Whatever, but this is a really important one to think, what differentiates you from maybe folks who are already working there and or other applicants. Next, another item that's highly persuasive is the market rate. If you can say, you know what, I just talked to my friend who got hired for the same job at a competitor company of yours, and they're still advertising and they're paying $5,000 more a year. Again, remember, the employer doesn't want you to start the job only to quit and take a new job across the street in a month from now or 2 months from now. So there's an incentive for them to pay the market rate, and if you've got good data on that, that can be a persuasive reason. Next, you know, current salary or competitive offers. Obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously. For most people, they're going to expect their next job to pay more for their current job, more than their current job. So now is an entirely appropriate time for you to say, you know what, I'm already making $39,000. I've got a great gig where I am. I might be eligible for some promotions. So I'm not sure, you know, I'm looking to make a bigger bump than $1,000 to $40,000 at my next job. That would be a valid reason, or you're already making 40 or more. Competitive offers, that's of course maybe like the most persuasive reason of all, right? If you have an offer on the table for $45,000, that pretty much tells the employer that they're going to have to match that or have some other really compelling thing that they're offering you, like, you know, 1 month paid vacation in Hawaii every year, whatever it is, in order to get you to accept a lower number. Inside the employer's mind. Again, this is potentially new information, and it's things that don't always occur to new applicants. As I said before, right, the employer wants to say yes to you, including potentially a pay raise, because number one, I want this person on my team. The employer's going to work with you potentially every day. They want a person who's successful. Money is a part of the package, but like the right fit and the right person is a big piece of it. Next reason. Now for you, the job applicant, right, this is probably the job application process is pretty all-consuming. Not true for the employer. For the employer, they have a million other things to do and a million other pressures. They've got other tasks they're supposed to be doing. They have colleagues who are saying, hey, did you hire for that position yet? We really need that position filled. They want to start turning to those other things, and they want to be able to tell their colleagues, yes, I got the hire made, and get it done. The last thing they want is to say, oh yeah, remember we had the applicant number one, she was the finalist. Oh no, she said no because she asked for a $2,000 raise and I said no to the $2,000 raise. So we've got to go back to square one. Remember all the things that the employers are doing? They're sifting through a ton of resumes, they're having committee meetings. Nobody wants to repeat that process. So they want to say yes and don't want a couple $1,000s, which to most employers, it really isn't, that money piece isn't going to make a difference to them in a cosmic sense. All right, next reason, I lose money while the job is unfilled. What is to you a big deal of, like I say, 5%, 10% pay difference? Maybe you're going to be the team member that is required to fulfill the team to start billing a client on a project that's going to take in $10,000 a week or $20,000 a week. The employer is losing money while the job is unfilled, and so they want you to accept, and they want you to accept now. I left room to negotiate, right? I can go higher, again, inside of the mind of the employer. Plenty of employers have, like I say, a firm offer, or the number they give you really is like the final number. But there's also lots of cases where the number they give you, $40,000 in my example, they're leaving some room to negotiate, right? And that it's pretty easy for them to say yes to a couple $1,000s higher, that they're approved not for one number, but what they're approved for is a range, like 40,000 to 43,000 or 40 to 44,000. 10% is kind of usually a higher number on the range, but there usually is a range of some amount, and it's pretty easy to say yes within that range. Although I'll also just say on behalf of employers, unlike again the used car situation where the car salesperson or some other situations, they might try to give you like the lowest or the worst price they possibly can. I don't think that's true for jobs. I think that jobs, they're trying to pay in the ballpark because the cost of hiring someone only to have them quit and find a better paying job in a couple months, for where you folks are, right, we're talking about post-college professional jobs, the cost of training and rehiring is just not worth it. This is the biggest barrier that I think employees and job applicants don't fully understand, is the importance of internal equity at the employer's office. What do I pay others with the same or very similar jobs? Because here's what can't happen from the employer's point of view is, okay, so I've got a job, I'm working there for $40,000 a year. I can't have you come along with less experience, I've been in the job for a year, you come along and on day one, you're going to start earning $42,000 or $44,000. That's not going to work, right? Because the person who's been there for a year, I'm going to go bananas. And I will, I think employers here assume that word will get out. And so that's just not a situation that's going to work. This is part of why, like I said earlier, your reasons are things that are going to differentiate you from the other applicants and employees, things that are unique. It's giving that differentiator is just going to allow the employer to potentially have a little bit more flexibility with the internal equity issue, right? So same example, me, Steve, I've been working at the job for a year, I make $40,000 a year. The employer really wants to hire you, and they want to say yes to you at $42,000 or $44,000. Give them a reason, like, again, you speak Spanish, and the company just landed a gigantic account in a Spanish-speaking country, and you're going to work on that account. You know what? Now they have a reason why they can vary a little bit from internal equity. But that's the biggest barrier. It's also part of why, just I'll acknowledge, right? At large employers that are hiring, if you're applying at Best Buy or Cargill and your job title is administrative assistant level 1, and they're hiring 10 of those people every week, they probably have a pretty consistent number. And that's going to be a harder one to negotiate, at least on the base pay. Again, I don't think there's a downside to asking, but that will be harder. Whereas conversely, right, the more unique your job, or the smaller the employer, or if you're working with the owner, those are jobs that will tend to have more room for negotiation because there's less of an internal equity issue with 5 other people having the same exact job title. Let me go on and say we're focusing all on salary here, and salary I think is the first thing that you should try to negotiate. Depending upon the vibe you're getting from the employer, and I'll say how courageous you're feeling, you should always start with salary, but if they say no to salary, or maybe in your research you realize the salary is actually fantastic, then think about other things that you could negotiate, right? Sometimes it could be like a one-time signing bonus. That's easier for an employer to accommodate on an internal equity point of view. So again, for example, right, going back to the same job, you've got a master's degree, I don't. That might not get you a bump in your base pay, but it might be a reason why you could say, hey, you know what, how about a couple $1,000 signing bonus? or maybe you're going to have to travel more for work, or you're going to have to relocate. Consider a relocation bonus. There can be one-time things that if the answer is no to a bump in your salary, internal equity would allow a one-time plus. All right, other things in the mind of the employer. What's the budget or what's the range? Will I have to go for approval to give a raise or a bump? A lot of times, as I said, there's a range that's approved of a couple $1,000s. Sometimes there's not, or maybe you're asking for a higher number. If the employer or person you're talking to has to go to their boss and ask for like an exception, that's hard to do, right? Especially if you're an unknown quantity, you're a brand new applicant, because then the employer that you're negotiating with, the specific person, they're kind of sticking their neck out, and that's hard to do for a brand new applicant. Are you rude or ungrateful or entitled? All right. So there's this outright rude behavior, say, where people are not appreciative of the job, they become all about the money, or like I say, they sort of have an entitled attitude. And those are negatives. I put pushy in brackets and quotes because there's another term that people are afraid of being labeled, mainly women, and it's a sexist term, right? And I think we all know what I'm talking about. So that's a real issue, okay? And I acknowledge that issue, and I'll acknowledge that negotiating and asking is different. Women face different issues or perceptions than men do, and so I'm just going to acknowledge that issue. We could spend a whole webinar or a whole semester on it, and there's a lot of useful things to be said. Here's what I will offer for right now is the things that we've talked about here, such as, you know, asking, is this negotiable, or coming back with a certain number, how about 44 instead of 40? Again, if you're appreciative and excited and enthusiastic, I think that the job will still be there, right? That only 1 out of 5,000 has the offer taken away. I think there's lots of employers who will be just fine with that request, whether it comes from a man or from a woman. But then I'll also close by saying there will be some employers who don't love that you ask, right? Some employers don't like to negotiate, and they know that maybe they have to get the workers that they want, but they don't look forward to it. That can be true for men and women, right? I've talked to some human resources people who, when the employee comes back and asks, they're like, I've got to negotiate, and they're not thrilled about it. Regardless of gender, I guess I'll maybe offer this as some encouragement or as an aspirational piece, which is this is an important issue, and the impact over the course of your career is important enough that even if there is a perception that you are pushy, that maybe this is an okay place for that to happen, and that being pushy and getting the result that you want is more important than being, well, say, the most agreeable person. Conversation to be continued as our society moves forward and considers those issues. All right, next, in the mind of the employer on a more upbeat note, I want the employee to start happy. I heard this again and again, right? If you're, the employer wants you to hit the ground running and be excited to be where you are. They want you to stop your job search. And so again, they want to say yes if they possibly can to your request. When to talk compensation. All right, we've already hit this slide. Just remember, after the offer. I'm being on my slides here. All right, prepare your actual ask. So after you've gotten the offer, you've asked for it in writing, you've taken some time to think, what are you actually going to say? Maybe you're going to request a meeting, maybe you'll do it on the phone. People are doing it more and more by email. I don't love that, but that's a reflection of my age. I'm 48. I think that younger employers and younger employees are doing more of this by text and email. It's not my favorite, but it'll be what it will be. So the soft ask, right? I've got lots of people who their preferred thing to say is the salary negotiable? And just ask the question. That is a fine and perfectly good thing to do, and you know what, that works for a lot of folks, and I'd say, you know, that is just fine, and I'm okay with that. I think a little bit more powerful, if you're comfortable, is to give a specific thing. Would you consider, you know, thank you for the job offer, you've offered me 40, would you consider $44,000? Because 1 and 2 and 3, right? I've got this new skill, I can start right away, whatever it is. Think about what problem or issue are you helping the employer solve? how much to ask for. So people keep asking me this question, and I used to just say, it depends, do your research, but I kept getting the question so much, I want to give you a rule of thumb. Okay, but again, remember the rule of thumb is just that it may or may not be useful for you in your particular situation. So number one, research. Number two, if you've got a competitive offer, let them know what that is, right? So if they offer you 40, if you've got an offer for 50, let them know that. That's totally appropriate. Similarly, if you're in a job where you're really happy at 40 and they offer you 40, you can say, you know, I wouldn't leave my current job unless I was making 45 or whatever. And there it's just you coming up with a number that would make you happy, or you would be willing to move. My opinion, 5 to 10% over the offer is probably my target range, and 15%, that's pretty aggressive, and that's a stretch. You've got to have some pretty good reasons that you feel are solid reasons. More than 20% really requires special circumstances. And again, here's why, right? Let's go back to the average annual raise. A 20% raise is equivalent to between 6 and 7 years of annual raises on that job. And that for most jobs in most organizations, you know, a 20% raise or even a 15%, that's really the next job title up, right? In my example from, you know, your administrative assistant 1, then you are either, you know, administrative assistant or senior administrative assistant. That's a pretty big jump. Whereas I think that 5 to 10%, that's a range that is more doable. Also remember, unlike the car sales or the house sale, the employer is not oftentimes in a position to be making super lowball offers, because if they do, you'll be moving on to your next job, you won't stay very long. So they're trying to pay what they can afford to pay you to attract the level of talent that they can. All right, we are closing in on time, and I'm going to end on time. People focus too much in this area on like the specific words they're going to say and the specific reasons. Now those are important, but let me say, before you call up the employer or you go into the meeting, get big and psych yourself up. If you haven't seen this Amy Cuddy body language piece, when I negotiate now for my job, I stand. I have a standing desk, and I haven't negotiated sitting down in about 4 years. I don't know if you have that at home, and obviously you can't do it like in the meeting if you're face-to-face, but before the meeting, you know, go to the bathroom or walk up and down the hall and power pose. I'm a big believer in the power, not so much of the substance of what you say, but of like the presence and the confidence that you bring. All right, we've talked about the actual ask. Special circumstances, I'm going to skip that. Before we recap, part of why I don't go into like magic words or magic techniques, and part of why I find these books like Getting to Yes in some ways overwhelming, is in the moment of the negotiation, I think people are so focused on like the 4 or 5 or 10 bullet points or strategies. And part of why I encourage you to not take too many notes is I think this can all be distilled down to a couple of things, right? Try not to talk about salary until you get the offer. When you get the offer, say thank you, ask for details, but you don't need to negotiate then, right? So that phone call is just like a happy, easy phone call where you say, thanks, wonderful, can I get it in writing? I want to think about it. Then when you go back to the employer, is it negotiable? Could you do this number, 44,000 or whatever it is? Here's 1 or 2 reasons. The reasons that you give may not even be the reasons that are important to the employer, okay? You might say, I would like a $44,000 salary because I have a master's degree, okay? The employer might not care that you have the master's degree. What they need to do is they need to fill the job immediately because they have a new they have a new sales prospect that they need to close. Or the employer is about to go on a month vacation and they need to fill the job before they go on vacation, or whatever the reason is, right? And the reason that you give may or may not be the reason that motivates the employer. But by asking and negotiating, you're sending a signal. And the signal is, if you want to close this out right away, try to meet me in some level of salary negotiation. Now we'll recap. All right, please let me encourage you to pledge to negotiate or ask every time and make it a very normal, matter-of-fact thing, as matter-of-fact as when do I start or what are the benefits? Because employers view that in the same way. That's the next point, right? Employers expect you to ask. there is no penalty for asking. Unless you are extraordinarily rude, and on top of that, you ask for a crazy number, there's no penalty for asking. That's the 4,999 out of 5,000. Have your reasons ready, and then before you make the specific ask, do your power pose, watch the Amy Cuddy video. You are awesome. You can do it. All right, we are at time. I wanted to do more questions. John, are you there? Maybe we'll just do one question, and then folks who have to go can sign off and drop off. And for those who can stick around for 1 minute, I'll take a question.
Yeah, well, there's just a handful of them, and we can maybe do just lightning fast answers. One person had asked a question about public and nonprofit sectors, as far as if those types of employers often expect salary negotiation. Have you found that from talking to colleagues in those areas?
So again, great question. Public sector, it can be more regimented, but so number one, I would say still ask, because there's no downside. And secondly, although I'd acknowledge that there are a number of cases where the salaries in those sectors are not negotiable, I've also encountered plenty of examples where they are. And I'll think of one in particular. A good friend of mine in the government nonprofit sector, the employer really wanted to hire her, but they knew that she wanted a little bit more money. She explained that. And then she actually kind of collaborated with the person who was making the hire with her to figure out, okay, was there a way that we could get her kind of classified one class up, or for an exception process? Because again, the employer, once they make the offer, they want you, and so they may be your ally. So that would be my comment there, is research is always important. Maybe you can look at some way and even be collaborative with the employer as to how you might get graded one level up or qualify for an upward deviation.
Mm-hmm. For if somebody's been talking with an employer mainly through email about a job opportunity, should they negotiate via email, or should it always be done, or is it more preferable to do it by phone?
Great question. And you know, like I said, I don't want to. There's a great piece recently I read about some older counselor saying, don't have lots of exclamation points in like your thank you letter or your acceptance letter, only to find that the employer themselves like responded and used a ton of, like, you know, emojis and whatnot. The culture is changing, and so I'll acknowledge that if you've been negotiating or having back and forth in email, I'm certainly not going to say no to email. It's becoming much more common. I'm a little bit more old school. I'd probably rather have a preference for the spoken conversation, and part of the preference, and there's a reason behind it, right? And the reason is you can have better dialogue and information exchange, right? Because if it's just over email, it's kind of the bare facts, whereas in a spoken conversation, the employer might say, you know what, I can't bump your pay initially, but would you consider an accelerated performance review and possible annual raise at the 3-month mark if it's working out well? That kind of enhanced dialogue is much less likely to happen over email. So email is better than nothing, but I tend to think that spoken, phone, or in person is better than email. Let's do one last one if there is last one.
Sure, just one more. One person said that their employer is working with them as far as moving them from hourly to a salary position, and that kind of folds in with somebody who had asked a question about they just got their MBA degree. So in those circumstances where you're currently employed with somebody, how does that change things, perhaps, as far as the negotiation?
So that's a really great question, and probably we won't be able to go into detail, other than let me just say, like, especially like you just got a new degree. That, of course, represents to you a huge investment of time and effort, and that's like a real significant thing. Depending upon the job in the workplace, though, it doesn't necessarily put more money in the employer's pocket, and it doesn't necessarily give the employer a bigger budget. So that's one of the things where I think that employees wish, and in some workplaces, right, I mean, in some government workplaces, there's an automatic pay bump when you get a new degree, but in a lot of the private sector, there's not. And so that might be one of the cases where, you know, that person might want to consider applying at jobs elsewhere that are like 1 step up or 2 steps up, where the new degree is more explicitly acknowledged and compensated. Because if you're staying in the same job, unless you're bringing in more money, it's a little hard to make a compelling case. Nothing wrong with asking. The switch from hourly to salary, you know what? We'll just have to save that one for another time. But it's a good question for which I think there's just a longer answer than we have time for. But John, everybody, let me say thank you for your time and good luck to everyone negotiating. Please make a pledge to someone, especially yourself, that you'll do it because the stakes are too significant not to.
Thank you so much for your time, Steve. We really appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. It was great to see so many numbers of people logging in to hear Steve's presentation today. In closing, members of the University of Minnesota Alumni Association make initiatives like this webinar series possible. Thank you. Because of members, we can enrich the lives of alumni, support student success, and make a better University of Minnesota. And if you're interested in becoming a member, you can do so at minnesotaalumni.org/join. This is the conclusion of today's webinar. Thank you for joining us and for being an active member of our worldwide community of 455,000 plus University of Minnesota alumni and friends. Have a wonderful day. Bye.